The CoinWeek Podcast is brought to you by PCGS. The January-February edition of the Rare Coin Market Report is out now. Now edited by our friend and former CoinWeek staff writer Josh McMara-Hernandez, the PCGS Rare Coin Market Report offers the latest look at rare coin prices, insightful articles from leading experts, and PCGS's renowned and gorgeous coin photography. Also, you can celebrate PCGS's 35th anniversary with new limited edition coin inserts, all featuring state-of-the-art security features that will give you peace of mind. Visit www.pcgs.com to learn more. On this episode of the CoinWeek Podcast, I'm joined by new CoinWeek staff writer, Chris Bulfinch. If you listen to podcasts or read numismatic content on a regular basis, you'll be familiar with Chris's work as he was previously the co-host of the Coin World podcast with our friend writer Jeff Stark. He did a great job with Coin World, and we're excited to have him on board here at CoinWeek, where he will become a regular fixture, not only in the CoinWeek podcast, but also in articles that we present to you, feature writing, news pieces, and also some of our multimedia content, which we plan to produce together. So we're excited to welcome him on board, and we're going to have a conversation about basically the numismatic developments of the last 4 years. As we close out this administration and open the timetable to the next one. And so we're going to talk about various things, from changes of coin composition to the delay of the $20 redesign, the circulating commemorative coin program and where we think it stands, the redesign of the Silver Eagle, and also the introduction of the Palladium bullion coins. So Chris and I will have a lot to say about what has been a very impactful 4 years in the history of our coin collecting hobby. And all this is next on the CoinWeek Podcast. Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Hey, Charles. I'm doing well.
Been a busy and altogether surreal week we've had.
Surreal's a word for it.
So, I think it's, as we're wrapping up like a period of American history, every presidency has a lasting and enduring impact on not only America, but the numismatic hobby. I was kind of interested in looking back and seeing what has been policy driven versus what has been sort of inside of the mint's, creative decisions that have set this last 4 years apart from the previous 8. And just sort of noodling around, I came up with a couple of things that I thought were important that coin collectors would probably be interested in hearing us discuss. These changes will be relevant for years to come. And they open the door for us to have some really interesting conversations about what the future of the modern hobby should look like. So let's start that conversation and go into these in order of what I think are precedents. The first thing is we saw a composition change of our silver and gold commemorative coins from 0.900 to 0.999 fine. Do you have any insights as to why this occurred?
Truthfully, I don't. I remember seeing coverage of the legislation as it passed, and I've been reading for a couple of projects that I'm working on. I've been reading some of the coverage dating back a number of years, and actually even before the Trump administration. I've been reading coverage from the past 5-6 years, from the beginning of 2015 to the present. And the sense that I got was that they were trying, and I think I can understand it, that they're trying to standardize and this was the sense that I got, was that they were trying to standardize the production process, and that a lot of the legislation for commemorative coins, for example, mandates that they shouldn't be less than a certain fineness. And normally, like you said, it was 0.900, 0.900 for a long time for commemorative coinage, where for silver bullion, for example, it was 0.999 fine, 1 ounce of silver in the American Eagle silver bullion coins. So they did change the composition, or my understanding of the change that you're referring to was that it allowed the mint more latitude or a greater degree of discretion in determining the fineness of commemorative coins. So, and as you said, that opens the door to the mint increasing the fineness of commemorative coinage. So that's the change as I understood it, and I think that it probably had to do with trying to streamline the production process.
Well, a few years ago, Hubert and we wrote an article based on an observation that we had where we felt like the modern coin era was over, and that we actually were living in like a postmodern coin era, ultra-modern coin era. Those two words have completely different meanings to, academics. But for the sake of what we're talking about here, in the classic commemorative coin period, like if somebody asked for a $50 to be struck, then the $50 would be made out of 0.900 silver, because that's what $50 were made out of. So therefore, there was no special concession given to the coinage composition, because they were just asking for a different design on the legal tender of whatever the denomination was. When the modern commemorative coin period kicks off in 1982 with the Washington $50, this coin is struck in a composition that is not the current tenor of $50 being produced by the mint. So after 1970, the mint adopts a completely clad composition for a $50. So all circulating coins at that point contain no precious metal. And so you get to the Olympic program a year later, and now you're seeing the silver dollar 0.900. You're seeing gold $10 coins, and these coins look and feel like the coins that they're referencing, these precious metal coins, but they really bear no direct relationship to the coins that are actually in production that Americans are spending. The argument I make, and Hubert made in that article, was that they were tributes to a type of coin that no longer existed and had real currency, and therefore they were not the same. And so, taking it a step farther, you come to 2020, and the mint says that 0.900 standard, which was the classic standard, the pre-64 silver standard, the pre-33 gold standard, that 0.900 standard is a historical artifact and doesn't need to be preserved. The coins go from essentially a legal standard, which with a history, to a bullion standard. And I think that again removes these coins from the category that they were in before, when they were merely tributes to our classic coin compositions. Now they're an entirely different thing. As far as I'm concerned, they're just completely bullion coins with design stamped on them. They're not tributes to legal tender coin denominations of a prior period. All right. So a second thing, getting back to the 0.999 fineness, is there's been a redesign of the American Silver Eagle. So as we know, that the American Silver Eagle features an adapted obverse from Weinman from the Walking Liberty $50, a coin that actually, if you go back in history, never struck up all too well. So they had to make serious refinements so that the center mast of Liberty was not flatly struck. And then it featured a reverse, sort of a classic shield reverse, designed by former chief engraver of the United States Mint, John Mercanti. So now we're seeing a new design for the reverse. Do you think it will stand the test of time and be as iconic as the Mercanti version?
I don't know whether it will be as iconic. I do think that it's time for a change. I like Mercanti's design. One of the first coins that I ever added to my collection, it was a gift from my uncle, was a 2001 Silver Eagle. And I think the new design is attractive. It's more dynamic. The heraldic design is more classic, I guess. It's more in line with, sort of traditional designs of U.S. coinage. But whether it stands the test of time or not, I don't know. And I'll be curious to see how people respond to it and how well it strikes and how well it ultimately comes out. I mean, new coin designs often, a symptom of a transitional design is that, like you mentioned with Weinman's original Walking Liberty $50, it didn't strike all that well and needed some modification. So I assume that in the 21st century, the mint has tested it has tested the new design fairly extensively and they'll be able to strike it fairly consistently. So I don't imagine that there will be a ton of errors or that it will present any significant challenge. But at the same time, it's a new design, and that does come with certain challenges. And I'll be interested to see the collector reception. I personally like it. I think it's a little bit more dynamic than Mercanti's design, which, like I said, I like. But I think this new design is a little bit more, has a little bit more going on. The eagle's kind of diving down, right? So, yeah, I mean, I like it on the whole. And again, whether it stands the test of time or not, I think will largely depend on public reaction. I think if people, universally don't like it, then they might be more apt to change it. Or if people gravitate towards it or respond positively to it, then they might hold on to it. So,
well, I think one thing people have to realize, and they may take this for granted, but John Mercanti was a hell of an engraver. He designed a number of commemorative coins that have some of the most intricate detail on any coins struck by the United States Mint, especially his architectural renderings and his profiles. But if you consider how fine and delicate the reverse design was and how detailed it was, that design was executed before a day of laser engraving and computer engraving. So this was all in the plaster and then reduced and then struck into dies. Of course, this changed in more recent years as the Mint began producing dies using laser technology. But yeah, Mercanti's design was really a standout design and rightfully celebrated. I'm kind of sad to see it go, or maybe the Mint not giving Mercanti a chance to create a new version of the reverse, because I think this coin has been so intimately connected to him and his legacy that it seems weird to me that somebody else designed the reverse.
Yeah, he did retire over a decade ago, though, so I don't know that he would necessarily want to come out and do anything else for it. And it's, reading the sort of biographical historical section of Whitman's book on American Eagle silver dollars. Mercanti wrote that section and talks a lot about his work at the Mint, which I knew who he was, having collected coins for a fairly long time. I was aware of Mercanti, but having him describe some of the changes at the Mint in his tenure was really interesting. So I would encourage people to go look up some of the stuff that he's written about his experience at the Mint. I found it interesting. So
he's one of the nicest guys. He reminds me a lot of Frank Aspero. Very, very giving of his time to the hobby. He's still doing design work. He's just not getting paid at government rate.
Well, that could be an improvement. I don't know.
All right, so this is going to be a hot potato. Let's throw it around a little bit. So there was the delay and cancellation of the $20 Federal Reserve note. I think that the administration was very coy about their designs for the note. At least the Mnuchin Treasury Department didn't want to really come out and say that they had no plan to release a $20 bill featuring Harriet Tubman. This, of course, was put into motion in the last months of the Obama administration after a public campaign to replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. I had some firsthand interactions with people at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and I was basically led to believe that the design process for a new note was well underway at the time. Of course, there's always a covert process that is undertaken when you redesign currency to protect it against counterfeiting, and I don't know how far along that process was. We just published a podcast last week with Karen Hill, the president and CEO of the Harriet Tubman Home, and her organization was involved directly with the Treasury Department. They found a photograph of Harriet Tubman when she was in her 20s, which is about the time of the Civil War. And they provided that, authenticated it, and provided it to the Treasury so that they could put their staff to work using that version of Harriet for the redesign. I was told that they had an artist selected to do the engraving and that it was fairly far along before the Obama term ended. So do you think that we will see in light of all the things that are going on in the country that are certainly more important. The Treasury Department trying to take this issue back up. Lou, as you know, not only wanted to redesign the $20 bill, but also the back of the $10 bill, I believe, to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage. Mm-hmm. Should we change that note, or should we maybe consider changing all U.S. currency to reflect sort of like different subjects?
I'm in favor of changing all U.S. currency. I do think that Harriet Tubman replacing Jackson on the $20 Federal Reserve note was appropriate. And the sense that I got, and you seem to have the inside track on it, so you're probably better positioned to comment on it, or at least you can tell me whether my interpretation sounds right or not. The sense that I got reading the coverage, I read Art Friedberg's coverage in Coin World. I read, the New York Times published a piece, I know they published something in 2019. I'm not sure if they published something in 2020 as well. But it attracted mainstream media attention. And the sense that I got was that the Treasury Department under President Trump was effectively punting, right? My interpretation of that, which you can feel free to comment on its reasonableness, was that President Trump had spoken out publicly against the measure. He had deemed it an act of quote unquote political correctness. So since he's on record being against it, and it seems like the kind of small but symbolic issue that he would take to Twitter over. I suspect that the Treasury Department just didn't want the headache of trying to bring the redesign through under Trump. So I think they just kept punting because they didn't feel like dealing with it, even though a lot of people in the Treasury Department or at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing might have wanted to go ahead with it. And reading Friedberg's reporting, the sense that I got was that a lot of them were pretty excited to go ahead with it, but that under Trump, there was a sense that they couldn't do it, or that it was sort of being put on hold. So with Trump about to leave the White House, ostensibly, it seems a lot more likely now. I think that the Biden administration is probably a lot more receptive to that kind of symbolic change. So I don't know whether or not we'll see it during the Biden administration or when exactly we'll see it, but I have a feeling that the Biden administration is a lot more receptive to the idea of changing it, which I happen to support, and I guess we'll see where it goes. But I guess there's a possibility now that it will happen, where I don't think before there was much of a chance.
I'm kind of two minds about the whole issue. I mean, it's going to be a political issue, right? No matter how you slice it.
Well,
but right. let's just look at it this way. So, if Jackson's removed from the note and Tubman's put on the note, that means that 3 of your circulating currency denominations are going to have Civil War figures. You're going to have Grant, you're going to have Tubman, and then you're going to have Lincoln. Then you'll have 3 founding fathers, with Jefferson and Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Now, we're in the 3rd century of the American experiment. And I feel like at a certain point, we're mythologizing people to where any sort of historical revelation about them or consideration about them becomes sort of an attack on the state religion, if you will. Washington's a complex guy, probably one of the greatest presidents we ever had. But there's plenty about Washington that can be criticized. Same about Lincoln. Even if you aren't like, someone who thinks he shouldn't have pursued war against the southern states, there's still a lot about Lincoln, which is, controversial and we should, as Americans, be open and willing to go and look at these people and have the potential to reevaluate them over time. That's what historians do. I think we're getting to the point, though, where any sort of understanding about these people is always seen through some political lens. Either you have to support it or you have to tear someone down. And I think that we're putting too much emphasis on these people, especially when it comes to like the symbols of the state, which is what paper money is and what coins are. This is why I think you see a sentiment amongst a lot of coin collectors where they wanted liberty to stay on the coins, because liberty is an idea. It's hard to criticize the basic idea from which your country was founded. And, with our paper money, I mean, we've basically kept these figures current on this money for much longer than like they ever served in office, whatever impact they ever had as office holders. They belong to the ages. But by not changing all of it, if you only pick one person and say, well, this person was a bad guy, so doesn't deserve to be on it, let's put this person on it, then I can't see how people start to say, well, when does it end? Is everybody a bad person? And at that point, I think that you're basically opening a wound that doesn't need to be opened when you can achieve the same thing by saying, we want to redesign all of it to reflect, whatever the concept is. I mean, the concept has to be a viable concept. If you go to like any of the other industrialized countries, the major leading currencies often get redesigned, and they don't have the most important figures of their history featured on their currency. They rotate around. They celebrate their achievements, and I would like to see our currency reflect our achievements, especially our achievements in the last 130 years. I think we have a lot to be proud of in the 20th century and onward. I think with the technology that can be brought to bear, we can have much more elegant looking currency. I think as a collectible, it would be good for our hobby because more people would get into collecting paper money as these new designs would come into play. And I just think that, kicking the can down the road on this particular issue is really kicking the can down the road on the larger issue, which is it's probably time to redesign all of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the use of any one individual person is almost inevitably problematic, because if you pick one person, no matter how influential or important an historical figure they are, if you select them for the sort of veneration of appearing on US paper money, then you do have to reckon with who they were as an individual. And Jeff and I talked about this on the Coin World podcast on a number of occasions, how we both favored allegorical representations of the values that unite us, or that the values that we claim, whether we live out those values or not, the values that America claims to hold and to stand for, expressed allegorically, would not only does that offer more sort of imaginative and creative possibilities for how to represent those values, but it avoids, like you said, the kind of deification of specific American figures who, again, I'm glad for the debate that's been happening over the last, I haven't been following it until the last few years, but I'm glad that in the last couple of decades or so, it has become a lot more possible to have a nuanced conversation about historical figures and to acknowledge the painful history that so many of them represent. And I don't know that continuing to select individual people for veneration is the right course. And like you said, we do have a lot to be proud of, although the 20th century certainly was a mixed bag in terms of America's achievements, although undeniably remarkable achievements. There's a lot of painful history in the 20th century, both in America and our role in the world, that we also have to reckon with. So I think I would favor allegorical figures that represent the values that we claim or the values that we aspire to, as opposed to any individual person. And I thought that Jack Lew and the Treasury's idea of having vignettes on the back of the $10 Federal Reserve note that celebrate the suffrage movement, I thought that was a good idea, though in celebrating the suffrage movement, which was undeniably women gaining the right to vote in 1920, was a great step forward. It's also worth acknowledging that a lot of people were left out of that progress, that Jim Crow, voter suppression laws, and terror in the South directed at Black people, that denied a lot of people their franchise and didn't allow them to exercise that newly gained right. So though the 19th Amendment was a huge step forward, it was not, the benefits of that amendment were not universally shared. And so it would be really, really hard to create a vignette that acknowledges that complexity, that acknowledges the obvious progress, while conceding that progress did not lift everyone up. And, and again, I don't envy anyone who is in the position of trying to figure out how to communicate that, but I do agree with you that the designs on our currency should change, and I'd like to see them move in a more allegorical direction, or, like you said, trying to celebrate some of the positive steps in American life over the past 100 and some odd years.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see a I mean, I could think of off the top of my head, maybe half a dozen or so momentous things that could be celebrated on currency, from, a landing on the moon or the space program to the development of the polio vaccine to, I don't know, the Yankees coming back on the Red Sox in 1978. It's all very important.
All
It's
right,
American history.
let's not be celebrating anything where the Red Sox aren't succeeding. All right, if we're gonna celebrate anything relating to baseball, breaking the curse of the Bambino in 2004 is what we ought to be celebrating. But anyway, continue.
All right, so another topic is getting on to what we commemorate is the continued proliferation of circulating commemorative programs. The Mint changed the way it was able to produce coins leading up to the release of the state quarter program, which allowed it to release 5 different quarter designs per year. And that program was meant to last for 10 years and result in 50 coins celebrating each of the states in the order in which they entered into the Union. After the termination of that program, the law that authorized it called for the return of the heraldic eagle reverse on the Washington quarter, and for the coin to essentially revert back to the design that was introduced by John Flanagan in 1932. Now, that did not turn out to be the case. We saw Washington, D.C. and territories quarters in 2009, and then in 2010 until the Tuskegee quarters released in the beginning of this year. There was a 10-plus year program for America the Beautiful national parks, and that program continued. There was a presidential dollar program that was introduced in 2007, and that reached its terminus as coins were struck for every deceased president. There was a gold bullion program with first ladies that mirrored that. And now we see a new dollar coin program with American Innovation. And I'm sure at a certain point, there will be further circulating coin programs, even as the Washington crossing the Delaware design takes its place of the America the Beautiful quarters later this year. Do you think that these circulating coin programs are a net positive for the hobby at this point, or do you think that they sort of are too much?
I wonder how many more collectors are interested in seeing. I know that looking at comments under Coin World or CoinWeek articles, looking at online collector forums, a lot of people are expressing, it's funny. It's in some ways it's analogous to the Star Wars movies, in that a lot of people after Solo came out, people talked about franchise fatigue, about, well, you know what, if there's a new one of these movies every year, every 2 years, sooner or later people are going to burn out. And it may not be a perfect analogy, but I think that a similar dynamic is at play here, in that, I mean, I say this as someone who has tremendous affection for the original state quarter program. I remember my dad, I've told the story on the Coin World podcast, and I think it bears repeating, just as one person's experience who was fairly young when those coins came out and can attest to the positive impact that they had on my interest in coin collecting, or the role that they played in helping to stimulate my own interest in coins and coin collecting. I remember my dad coming home in 2001. I was about 4 or 5 years old or so. And he had green Littleton folders for, that had, the 5 slots each year for each of the quarters. And, my family and I had a really good time picking those coins out of circulation. It got to the point that my older brother and I were so competitive that we instituted a rule in the house that no one could add a new quarter to their folder until there was one for both brothers. It got to the point, I seem to remember we were at a Starbucks somewhere in Massachusetts, and I seem to remember my brother and I pestering my dad to the point that he asked a cashier working at a Starbucks if he could put 50 cents into the tip jar to pull out it was a Kansas quarter. I remember that very vividly. So, and I also remember looking at the year 2008 and thinking, wow, 2008, that's going to be crazy in the future. This 2003 or 4. So it's funny now we're in 2021 and I'm starting to feel old. So I share that anecdote to explain that I have a lot of positive memories associated with that. And I think that circulating commemoratives can stimulate interest. Having gone through 20 years of state quarters, though, I don't know how many more are necessary. I think that if those coins were going to create a renaissance of American coin collecting, I think they probably would have done it by now across all of the different programs and all of the different product options. And I think it exhausts collectors because people who are completionists and who want to buy all of the mint sets and all of the proof sets and the silver proof sets and all of the different products that the mint releases, these coins eventually are just adding more and more entries that people have to check off and are increasing the costs for people who want to have complete sets of modern mint products. So again, I say this as someone who has a lot of fond memories and a very positive association with the original state quarter program. And even I thought that a number of the America the Beautiful quarters were really pretty, and I had some fun. I've been picking them out and trying to fill. I have a P&D folder now, a slightly better folder than the one I had in the early aughts. I don't know who made it. That I've been filling with the America the Beautiful quarters that I pick out of change, and I've been filling it since probably I think I got it in 2013 or so. Sometime, in the last 10 years. And that's enjoyable, but I would also understand that a lot of collectors are probably tired of it. And I think there are a number of other interesting avenues through which the hobby could attract new people. And if the goal is to attract new people or younger people, because the rationales that I've heard articulated for things like the state quarter program are, this will engage a broader variety of folks. There'll be a history lesson in your pocket, or it'll engage younger folks. I've heard a whole bunch of different explanations trotted out, and I think that there's some truth in all of them in some sense. I don't think that any of them are wrong, but I also think that if circulating commemoratives are far from the only way to try to raise the sort of profile of coin collecting. So I don't know. I don't know that I would continue were I working at the Mint, or were I in a position where I could make any decisions about this. I don't know that I would continue with more of these programs, but I guess if it's a money spinner for the Mint, they might continue doing it. I honestly don't know.
I think I would trade. First of all, if you go back to, the just the product bloat that we're dealing with now. You have pretty much before the state quarter program came out, and before the Mint started creating two types of proof sets, they created essentially a mint set and a clad proof set, and then you had the coins they made for circulation and the occasional commemorative as they would be authorized by Congress. In the mid 90s, they start to produce silver proof sets alongside with the clad proof sets. So now you had a silver version and a clad version. And then when you get to the state quarter program, that just makes the proof sets all that much more expensive. The mint sets that much more expensive. And then now we're dealing with like special finishes and God knows what else is going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised at a certain point if we get colorized proof coins or whatever.
Well, the Mint already crossed that Rubicon with the Basketball Hall of Fame coins this year, or this past year.
Yeah. So the very thing that, like, when the state quarters are out and people are colorizing them and selling them in the secondary market may actually end up being a mint produced thing at some point in the future. But I just think that there's just so many products right now that, like, I think that it just becomes chaos. And as somebody who just thinks about the way collectors, they sort of want discrete collections that are easy to understand. And we've just made modern numismatics so complex by all of the different ways the Mint is trying to monetize these programs. I think even about the America the Beautiful quarter program, you have those large 5-ounce discs, which are probably the best way to look at the design. But even those discs have two versions. You have the bullion version, and then you have the collector version. So even with that, like, it's almost to the point where it's just so many different ways to collect something. And I just wonder in the long term if there's just ever going to be a sustainable demand. And the other thing is, I can remember when the state quarters came out, I probably off the top of my head can remember the first 10 or 11 issues that came out, because it was a real, like a craze at the time. But maybe I remember that the The Wyoming quarter came out in 2007. I mean, I know that the Mariana Islands came out in 2009 because it was a territory. But getting to the America the Beautiful ones, I mean, I'd be hard pressed. You say, oh, what year was the Gettysburg one? I wouldn't know. And then the other thing is, I just don't know like how often people look at their change at this point to see these coins. The dollars aren't even struck for circulation. So even to have those coins, you're buying mint sets or proof sets or the special packaging. So all of these things exist only for collectors to spend money at the mint store.
Well,
I think
the early presidential dollars, I might have the year wrong here, but I think it was in 2011 was when they struck the last ones for circulation. So the first number of presidential dollar issues were struck for circulation, and I remember finding them in getting them as change in vending machines or something. If you put a 5 in and you buy something, you might spit out a couple of. I mean, I was finding Susan B. Anthony's, and I imagine some people going to vending machines that dispense $1 coins might still find Susan B. Anthony's, probably the 79s. That being the most common year. I agree. I think the phrase "product bloat" describes what's going on fairly well, and like something that I've been meaning to do, and I just, especially with the pandemic, just haven't had the time or the focus to bother trying to do it. But I've been wanting to put together an example of every Massachusetts coin or coin that commemorative, every coin that commemorates Massachusetts in any way that's been issued since the state quarter program. So Massachusetts was commemorated in 2000 for the state quarters, 2019 commemorating the Lowell Mills for the America the Beautiful, the 5-ounce bullion and collector versions of the America the Beautiful quarter, Massachusetts American Innovation dollar. I would like to get a full set of those just out of love and loyalty to my home state. But I mean, I wouldn't personally go to the trouble of putting together a full set of all the different finishes and all the different coins that have been issued. It's just across all the different states and all these different programs. It's just too much. And to go to the presidential dollars for a second, I don't remember those coins faring particularly well in circulation. I seem to remember that they tarnished fairly quickly in circulation. And I've never talked to anyone who was really excited to get a dollar coin and change. Some people were kind of curious about it, like, oh, I didn't know they were putting all the different presidents on dollars. I encountered a few people who had that reaction, but I don't know. I don't think the presidential dollar program, whether as a product for collectors or as coins for circulation, I don't know that that's something that I would continue. And also, I just wasn't a huge fan of the coins to begin with.
I think the fact that they called it a golden dollar didn't work in its favor either. I mean, the same people who would buy a Buffalo proof for 1995 off of an internet or a TV ad and think that they're buying an actual gold bullion coin are the same people who think that the golden dollar has gold in it and is worth $1, so they shouldn't spend it. I think that worked against the coin, to be honest, even though that was the effort they took to get people to actually not confuse it for a quarter.
Well, it just added confusion, and I think probably traded down on any goodwill that the program might have had. Because if people, I'm not saying that anyone who thought that those coins contained gold was, I'm not saying that that was necessarily a reasonable inference, but if people feel like, they're being advertised to falsely, then they're probably not going to have a positive reaction to that. And of course, that specific issue has many more impactful manifestations. I mean, I think public trust in collectible coins or public trust in numismatics is damaged a lot more by people, hawking worthless sets of stickered state quarters or something at outrageous prices. I think that probably damages the credibility or the trustworthiness of the hobby more, but still, I agree with you that it sowed, applying the term golden dollar to them sowed confusion. And I agree with you that didn't work in the coin's favor.
I guess the last issue about the last is probably something that's essentially just occurred in the last year. But with the pandemic and many Americans withdrawing from their normal behavior in the economy, we've seen a prolonged coin shortage, the likes of which we probably haven't seen since the 1960s. The Mint continues to make coins and distribute them, but I think that the feedback loop that had existed in the past has been interrupted by people not returning coins or freely circulating them. I know on my my personal use of coins has precipitously declined as I've become more accustomed to paying by debit card or credit card or online. But I don't think I've spent or exchanged a single coin in the past year, nor have I been offered a coin in change. Does this portend a future where coins become increasingly less relevant, or does this hasten up the day where we actually have to have a serious discussion whether or not the mint should continue to make coins, or at least the coins in the denominations that we currently see in production?
That's a good question, and I've heard it asked in a number of different places. I mean, I seem to remember early on in the pandemic, March, April, sometime in the spring, I remember writing a brief piece on the increased use of cashless payment methods, electronic payment methods. And the pandemic has undoubtedly been a boon to the electronic payment industry because people are ordering their groceries to their doorstep, and paying with a credit card or paying through some other electronic means. I mean, I haven't had a cash transaction in going on a year. I think I was last patronizing businesses regularly, or going into public space regularly in like maybe March. So I certainly haven't been using cash very much, and I think it's given the electronic payment services more power, and because they have greater market share now because they're being used more. So it's undoubtedly increased their power, but I don't think I don't think this is a harbinger of a cashless society necessarily, because for as common as cashless and electronic transactions have become, so many people still rely on cash. I mean, I remember one of the very first stories I covered at CoinWorld when I started working there in the late summer of 2018. One of the very first stories I covered was testimony given in front of Congress by then Mint Director Ryder, although he still is the Mint Director, and Len Olahar. And one of the things that they talked about are the number of Americans who are unbanked or underbanked. And it's something like 45 million Americans are either unbanked or underbanked. And so not having access to a traditional bank account often makes it harder, if not impossible, to have many forms of electronic payment or cashless payment. And so not being able to access that infrastructure, or people who don't access that infrastructure for whatever reason, cash is still really, really important. And I definitely think that the electronic payment services have gotten more powerful as a result of the COVID pandemic, and they certainly have made a lot of money. But I think cash is going to remain a very important part of the American economy for quite a while. I mean, again, I think that the dynamic is changing. I see your point, but I think cash is going to be a part of all of our lives, and a very, very important part of a lot of people's lives for a while yet. At least that's my impression.
Well, it'll play out the way it does. As the last 4 years have been part of history. They're in the books now. This administration, as we said, is in the books. We're about 10 days away from the changing of the guard, and count on numismatic books written years from now, looking back at this time and pointing out all the remarkable and unbelievable things that we've lived through. And, I imagine that future collectors will have a different insight into the year 2020 that we could never even fathom. They'll never understand what it was like to be basically under house arrest for most of the year, trying to avoid getting this virus. And the coins that circulated or didn't circulate during this time will certainly be memorable. I very much look forward to getting the 2021 coins in my pocket. It's always like one of the highlights of my year to see the new coins as they come off the press. I can't wait to see the quarter, although I would like to see like I said, as with the case with the currency, I'd like to see a complete redesign of circulating coins. But we can talk about that next time. What do you got? What kind of coverage do you have going on this week? What should readers look for?
Yeah, well, I've been working on, as you know, Charles, I've been working on a coin profile of the almost unique and incredibly rare and storied 1870s $3 gold coin. It has a fascinating story that I've been digging into. I'd heard of it, but I hadn't really gotten the sort of detailed history of it. So digging into that has been a lot of fun. So people should be checking that out whenever that is ultimately published. And Stax Bowers is having an auction January 15th to the 18th, and I'm covering a lot of the paper money sales. So I'm picking out a few interesting paper money lots from that auction, and I'm going to be writing up some short treatments of a few pieces in that auction. So that's what I'm working on for the immediate term, and I'm also going to be looking forward to coming back on to the podcast and talking to you about all things coin related. So I'm definitely excited for it. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to be here.
Cool. Well, thank you. We'll also have new articles from Q. David Bowers. I'll have a piece on the 1887 Morgan dollar that I've been working on, and we'll probably have a CoinWeek stream by the end of the week. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. On behalf of me, Chris, and Hubert, you guys have a great week, and happy collecting. If you like this podcast, please share it with your friends. Remember, you can download every episode of the CoinWeek Podcast for free on the iTunes Store, stream it online on our YouTube channel, or on CoinWeek.com. For CoinWeek, I'm editor Charles Morgan. Until next time, happy collecting.